If you bought a new vehicle in the last 5 years, I've got some news for you, and it's not good news. There's a non-zero chance that your engine came from the factory pre-seasoned with microscopic metal shavings. We're not talking about a few bad apples here. We're talking about millions of engines across nearly every major manufacturer that are either failing, recalled, or under federal investigation right now. Let me paint you a picture of just how bad this has gotten. General Motors recalled over 700,000 vehicles in April of 2025 for their 6.2-liter V8 engine. These are their flagship trucks and SUVs. Your Silverados, your Tahoes, your Yukons, your Escalades. And it's not just the recall that's scary. GM received over 28,000 complaints about these engines. 28,000. Out of those, more than 14,000 resulted in complete engine failure. Complete loss of power. And here's the kicker. There were 12 injuries reported and 42 fires. 42 engines that literally caught fire. But wait, it gets worse. Toyota, the company that built its entire reputation on bulletproof reliability, they're in the same boat. They recalled over 100,000 of their twin-turbo V6 engines in 2024. Then, just a few months ago, in November of 2025, they added another 127,000 vehicles to that recall. We're talking about the new Tundra, the Lexus LX, the Lexus GX. These are $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 vehicles, and that doesn't even include the hybrid versions, which apparently have their own issues they're still investigating. Honda's not off the hook either. They recalled almost 250,000 of their 3.5-liter V6 engines for connecting rod bearing failures. Now, for those of you who don't know, Honda has been the gold standard for engine reliability for decades. This is unprecedented for them. But here's where it gets really concerning. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration opened an investigation into 1.4 million Honda vehicles. 1.4 million. They're looking at models going back to 2016. And if you want to go back a bit further, Hyundai and Kia recalled 1.5 million engines starting in 2017. This isn't a new problem. It's been building for almost a decade now. So what the hell is going on? Why are all these manufacturers, brands that have spent decades building reputations for reliability, why are they all suddenly making engines that can't make it past warranty? I found this article from Automotive News published in December of 2025, and it's titled Power Failure: What's Causing Massive Engine Recalls? Now, Automotive News is generally pretty friendly to manufacturers, so when they're calling this out, you know it's serious. They interviewed engineers, university professors, independent mechanics, and what they found is pretty damning. Here's what's happening. The automotive industry has spent the last decade pushing for cleaner, more fuel-efficient engines, and on paper, that sounds great, right? Who doesn't want better gas mileage? But there have been some serious unintended consequences. These modern engines are delivering record amounts of power per liter. They're running at higher temperatures than ever before. They're creating higher cylinder pressures than engines used to handle. And all of this is happening in smaller packages. Think about it this way. Manufacturers are trying to get V8 power out of a V6, or V6 power out of a turbocharged 4-cylinder. You're taking the same amount of torque, the same amount of horsepower, and you're forcing it through an engine with half the displacement. That means less bearing surface area, less metal to absorb all that stress. It's like trying to do the same job with half the tools. But here's where it gets really interesting. To meet these fuel economy standards, manufacturers have been making their oil thinner and thinner. We used to run 5W30 in most vehicles. Some performance cars ran 10W40 or even straight 40-weight oil. Now, we're running 0W20 in most new vehicles, 0W16 in a lot of Toyotas and Subarus. And get this, some of the newest vehicles are speccing 0W8 oil. 0W8. That's barely thicker than water. Why would they do this? Because thinner oil reduces what engineers call parasitic losses. Basically, thin oil flows easier, so the engine doesn't have to work as hard to pump it around. That means better fuel economy numbers on paper. But here's the trade-off nobody wants to talk about. Thinner oil means you have to tighten your manufacturing tolerances. A lot. We're talking about clearances between moving parts that are thinner than a human hair. And when you're working with tolerances that tight, you need absolutely perfect machining, perfect cleaning, perfect assembly, every single time. I talked to, the article talked to Dave from Dave's Auto Center. He's a well-known engine builder on YouTube. And he brought up something called swarf. Now, swarf is the technical term for all the tiny metal particles left over from machining. The big chunks, the stuff you can see with your eyes, that's easy to clean out. But the microscopic stuff, the really fine particles from honing cylinder walls, that's what causes the problems. Dave described it like concrete. It's brittle, it's abrasive, and when it gets between a bearing and a journal, it just shreds everything in its path. Here's the thing though. Dave and his crew build one engine at a time, by hand. They can spend hours cleaning every passage, every gallery, every surface. General Motors is pumping out 1,000 engines a day. Toyota's doing the same thing. You simply cannot maintain that level of precision at that scale. It's economically impossible. But I don't think it's just the thin oil and tight tolerances. I think there's more going on here. Toyota's 5.7-liter V8, the one in the older Tundras, that engine runs 0W20 oil too, and guys are getting 1,000,000 miles out of those engines. So clearly, 0W20 can work if the engine is designed right and manufactured properly. Which tells me there's something else going on with these newer engines. One thing that keeps coming up is all the complexity manufacturers have added. Direct injection systems, turbochargers, variable valve timing, cylinder deactivation. And here's one I think is seriously underestimated. Start-stop technology. Every time you roll up to a red light, the engine shuts off. Then, when you hit the gas, it fires back up. Sounds great for fuel economy, right? But think about what's happening to your bearings during that restart. There's a moment where there's no oil pressure. None. And that's when wear happens. I've noticed something interesting. Fleet vehicles, the trucks that rack up 150,000 miles in 2 or 3 years, they seem to hold up better. Why? Because they're highway miles. They're not doing constant start-stop cycles. The engine gets up to temperature and stays there. Oil pressure stays consistent. And they're not getting that wear from dozens of restarts every single day. Then there's the variable oil pumps. These pumps adjust their output based on engine load and RPM. Sounds high-tech, but it means your oil pressure isn't constant anymore. Combined with start-stop, you've got periods where your bearings are running with less protection than they used to have. So let's add it all up. Higher cylinder pressures from turbocharging, tighter clearances from thinner oil, direct injection adding complexity, start-stop causing wear on every restart, variable oil pumps creating inconsistent pressure, and manufacturing debris that older engines could tolerate but modern engines cannot. It's a perfect storm of factors that all came together around 2020 to 2021. And I think COVID made it worse. Supply chains got disrupted, manufacturers had to switch suppliers, quality control probably suffered. There's been some speculation that the connecting rods and crankshafts in GM's engines came from suppliers who weren't machining them to spec. Toyota blamed debris left in their engine blocks during manufacturing. Honda said their crankshaft journals weren't machined properly. Hyundai claimed the same thing. Everyone's blaming debris. But here's where it gets suspicious. An independent engine builder named Eric Berg finally got his hands on a failed Toyota twin-turbo V6. He's been trying to get one for 3 years, but Toyota's been snatching them all back as core exchanges. He tears this engine down on his YouTube channel. And what does he find? The main bearings are absolutely destroyed, completely shredded. But the rod bearings? They're pristine, clean as a whistle. Now, here's why that matters. The main bearings and the rod bearings share the same oil circuit. If debris in the oil was the problem, both sets of bearings should show similar damage, but they don't. Which suggests this might not be a debris problem at all. It might be a design problem. Maybe the oil pressure isn't adequate for those main bearings under load. Maybe the bearing material itself is wrong. But design flaw is a lot harder for manufacturers to admit than, oops, we didn't clean the parts well enough. Remember Hyundai's Theta engine debacle? They blamed manufacturing debris too. Then the replacement engine started failing the same way. At some point, you have to ask whether this is really about dirty parts or whether there's something fundamentally wrong with the design when you push tolerances this tight. Now, let's talk about why this is happening. And it comes down to something called CAFE standards, Corporate Average Fuel Economy. These are federal regulations that mandate how many miles per gallon a manufacturer's entire fleet has to average, and those standards have gotten aggressive. For model years 2024 through 2026, the standards are increasing 8% per year, then 10% in 2026. By 2026, the industry-wide fleet average has to hit 49 miles per gallon. 49 miles per gallon. For the entire fleet. That includes full-size pickup trucks, it includes SUVs, it includes performance cars. Everything has to average out to 49 miles per gallon. And if you don't hit those numbers, you pay a fine. In 2024, it was $17 per vehicle for every tenth of a mile per gallon you fell short. That adds up fast when you're selling millions of vehicles. So what do manufacturers do? They downsize engines. They add turbochargers to make up for the lost power. They spec thinner and thinner oil to squeeze out every last fraction of an MPG. And here's the smoking gun. The same engines that are failing in the United States, they're sold in other countries with different oil specifications. Subaru specs 0W16 in the US, but the exact same engine in Japan runs on 0W20 to 5W30. Toyota's doing the same thing. Why? Because other countries don't have CAFE standards as strict as ours. And here's proof that the oil is the problem. What's GM's fix for their 6.2-liter recall? They're switching from 0W20 to 0W40. 0W40, that's twice as thick at operating temperature. If thin oil wasn't the problem, why would switching to thick oil be the solution? It's right there in their own recall documents. They know the oil is too thin, but they can't admit it because then they'd have to admit they prioritize CAFE compliance over engine longevity. There's another angle here that's going to make this worse, not better. The Trump administration made some changes to CAFE standards in 2025. Now, your first thought might be, great, they're rolling back regulations, problem solved. But it's not that simple. They eliminated the ability for manufacturers to count electric vehicles in their fleet average calculations. Think about what that means. Before, if a manufacturer sold electric vehicles, they could rate those at 200 or 300 miles per gallon equivalent. That would offset all the trucks and SUVs in their lineup, so Ford could sell phone 150 seconds that get 15 miles per gallon, but as long as they were also selling enough Mustang Mach-E's and F-150 Lightnings, their fleet average looked okay. They could even buy credits from other manufacturers to balance things out. Well, that's gone now. Electric vehicles don't count toward the fleet average anymore. But the fleet average requirement is still there. It got rolled back a bit, down to something like 34 miles per gallon by 2031. But here's the problem. Now manufacturers have to hit that 34 miles per gallon average without being able to use EVs to cheat the numbers. What does that mean for trucks? It means they're going to have to get even more creative. They can't just offset truck sales with EV sales anymore. So they're going to have to make trucks themselves more fuel efficient. How do you do that? Smaller engines, even thinner oil, more complexity. Or, and this is what I think we're going to see, everything becomes a hybrid. Every truck, every SUV is going to have a battery and electric motor added to it. More complexity, more things to break, higher prices. And manufacturers aren't going to walk away from all this. They've invested billions of dollars into these platforms. They're not going to scrap everything just because the political winds changed. Especially when they know that in 4 years, the pendulum might swing back the other way, so they're going to keep pushing forward with the same strategies that got us into this mess. Here's what really gets me. We have proof that this approach doesn't work. Over 5 million engines from 5 different manufacturers are either recalled or under federal investigation right now. The cost is estimated at over $8 billion. Hyundai alone is looking at $5 billion in costs for 3.3 million engines. That's billion with a B. And yet, I don't see any indication that the fundamental approach is changing. You know what the worst part is? These aren't cheap vehicles. A loaded Silverado or Tahoe can run $70,000, $80,000. A Tundra TRD Pro is $75 grand. A Lexus LX is over $100,000. And people are experiencing catastrophic engine failures with 30,000 miles on the odometer, some with less. There was a post just last night in a Tundra Facebook group. Another main bearing failure. Low mileage truck. Imagine buying a $70,000 truck, making payments on it, and 6 months later you're told it needs a complete engine replacement. Sure, it's under warranty, but now you're driving a practically new vehicle with a rebuilt engine. What's that going to do to resale value? Would you buy a 3-year-old truck if you knew the engine had been replaced? And some of these repairs are taking months because the replacement engines are backordered. So you're making payments on a truck that's sitting at the dealership. Some owners are trying to invoke lemon laws to get buybacks, but in many states, recalls don't qualify for lemon law protection. So you're stuck. You can't force a buyback, you can't trade it in without taking a massive loss, and you're just hoping the replacement engine doesn't fail too. Because remember, Hyundai owners found out that their replacement engines failed the same way the original ones did. And let's talk about the safety aspect for a minute. 14,000 of GM's complaints involved complete loss of propulsion. That means the engine just dies while you're driving. Maybe you're on the highway. Maybe you're in the left lane. Suddenly, no power, no acceleration. You're coasting to a stop in traffic. There have been 12 injuries and 42 fires reported just from GM's engines. Imagine you're driving your family in your Escalade, and suddenly there's smoke coming from under the hood. These aren't just inconveniences. These are legitimate safety hazards. Toyota's recall documents talk about engines stalling, rough running, inability to start, loss of power while driving. Honda's investigation mentions connecting rod bearing failures, which, if you know anything about engines, means pieces of metal are flying through your crankcase at thousands of RPM. Hyundai's Palisade recall mentions valve springs breaking and potentially putting a hole through the engine block. A hole in the block while you're driving. So what can you do if you own one of these vehicles? First, check if your VIN is included in any recalls. Go to NHTSA's website, plug in your VIN, see what comes up. If you're included, get it fixed. I know it's a hassle. I know you might be without your vehicle for weeks or even months. But the alternative is catastrophic engine failure at the worst possible time. Second, consider your oil change intervals. I know manufacturers are saying 10,000 miles, 15,000 miles between changes. Ignore that. Cut it in half. If they say 10,000, do it at 5. Yes, it costs more. Yes, it's more frequent. But you're dealing with tolerances that have zero margin for error. Fresh, clean oil is your best defense. Third, if your vehicle allows it, disable the start-stop system. I know it's there for fuel economy, but that constant starting and stopping is hard on bearings. Most vehicles have a button you can press every time you start the car to disable it. Some people have figured out ways to disable it permanently, though that might void warranties. Fourth, and this is controversial, consider running a slightly thicker oil once you're out of warranty. If you've got a Subaru that calls for 0W16 and the Japanese manual says 0W20 to 5W30 is acceptable, maybe run 0W20. You'll lose a fraction of an mpg, but you might save your engine. Just make sure you're still within the manufacturer's acceptable range. You don't want to void your warranty. And fifth, be realistic about what you're buying. If you're looking at a new vehicle, maybe avoid the first few model years of a completely redesigned engine. Let them work the bugs out. And honestly, with all these recalls, I'd be hesitant to buy anything from model years 2021 through 2024. Those seem to be the worst years across all manufacturers. Looking forward, I don't think this gets better anytime soon. The manufacturing processes that led to these failures, they didn't develop overnight. Engineers made decisions years ago about tolerances, about oil specifications, about supplier chains. Those decisions are baked into current production. Even if manufacturers wanted to fix it, it would take years to redesign engines, retool factories, change specifications. And I'm not convinced they want to fix it, because here's the dirty secret. Most of these failures happen just outside warranty. Or if they happen inside warranty, well, that's a known cost of doing business. They've run the numbers. They know X% of engines will fail. They know it'll cost Y dollars per failure in warranty repairs, and they've decided that's cheaper than redesigning the engines or using thicker oil and paying CAFE fines. It's a calculated decision, your engine's longevity versus their regulatory compliance, and they've chosen compliance because the fines for missing CAFE standards are immediate and certain. The warranty costs from engine failures are spread out over years and are, frankly, just a line item in the budget. This is why I think the problem is systemic. It's not that engineers at GM or Toyota or Honda suddenly forgot how to build engines. These companies have been making reliable engines for decades. The institutional knowledge didn't just disappear. What changed is the regulatory environment demanded things that pushed manufacturing beyond what can be reliably achieved at mass production scale. You can build an engine with 0W16 oil intolerances measured in microns. Dave and his team do it all the time. But they're building one engine, by hand, with unlimited time to clean and inspect every part. General Motors can't do that at 1,000 engines per day. The economics don't work. The timeline doesn't work. Something has to give. And what gives is quality control. And the saddest part? The people who suffer aren't the regulators who wrote the standards or the executives who made the decisions. It's regular people who saved up to buy a truck, who need it for their work, who are now dealing with catastrophic failures and fighting with manufacturers for buybacks. It's families stranded on the side of the road. It's the guy who just watched his engine catch fire in his driveway. So yeah, if you bought a vehicle in the last 5 years, you might want to start doing your research. Figure out if your engine is one of the problem children.